Hey, what's up, my friends? I'm Chris, and I want to help you get beautiful recordings. I've used and thoroughly tested over a dozen audio interfaces, and in this video, we're going to see how the Antelope Zen Quadro stacks up to them in categories like preamp transparency, line input transparency, dynamic range, the volume of the headphone output, and the direct monitoring mix control. I'm using this interface right now to record this, and I've also used it on several other projects, including with clients in the studio, and I didn't even tell them that I was experimenting with new gear. And I also produced a song and used this audio interface to record all the acoustical parts. So I've got acoustic guitar, electric guitar, acoustic drums, and vocals all going through this audio interface, so we'll get to that. I'll be comparing this interface to other audio interfaces and telling you about my experience with it. Now, there's a lot of innovation packed into this little box here. And there's a lot of features found in it that are only found on otherwise much more expensive audio interfaces. It has a rather unique and I would even say better way of managing word clock than what I've seen on any other audio interface. And there's one particular effect on this interface that is the best I've ever heard on any software or hardware emulation. Now, full disclosure, Antelope did send me this audio interface in exchange for an honest review, but I'm not being paid and they have no say in the final outcome of this video. Now, it's not very often that I see real innovation in an audio interface. And sometimes manufacturers try to come up with something new, but usually it's just some kind of a cheap gimmick. So I was really pleased to see some innovation here on things that I never even thought of, and they're actually practical. And I think the biggest thing for me that got me excited about this interface is the level of quality and features that it has for its price. Because really in the world of audio interfaces, there's a lot available, but I think the one that's the most comparable to the Antelope Zen Quadro would be the Apollo Twin X. The DSP capabilities are similar, but the Apollo Twin only has 2 preamps and the Zen Quadro has 4 preamps. Another comparable audio interface is the Neumann MT48. Now, I did a full review video on this. You can check that out on my channel, but long story short, I think the Zen Quadro is actually better. Now let's get into some technical stuff. One of my favorite tests is the transparency test. So the way I conduct this is I take a pre-recorded signal and I run it out the line outputs and I record it back in through the interface and listen to it to see how the analog circuits of the interface colored the sound. I do this test with the preamps where on the input I run the signal through the preamps, and I do this test with the line inputs where I run the input through the line input. Now I've done the exact same test on a lot of different audio interfaces, and every single time when I do one regeneration of the original audio signal, I just can't hear a difference. They're basically identical. So what I do is I take that re-recorded signal and I send it out the line outputs and record it back in through the preamps or through the line inputs, whichever one I'm testing. And then I take that newly recorded signal, send it out, record it back in. And you know what? After like 10 times, the majority of audio interfaces, I still can't hear a difference. But I know that there is something happening. These analog circuits have to affect the sound, and I want to hear what they're doing to it. So to really exaggerate this effect, I run the signal out and record it back in 50 times for the preamps and 100 times for the line inputs. Now, this test clearly reveals in an audible way if there's any coloration being added to the sound from the preamps or analog circuits of the unit. When testing the preamps, after 50 regenerations, some audio interfaces are greatly distorted at that point, and you can barely even make out the original signal, while some other audio interfaces are actually still quite authentic. Now, when doing this test through the Zen Quadro's preamps, they were the most authentic of any audio interface I've ever tested. After 50 regenerations, I could barely even hear any difference at all in the newly recorded signal. And in doing this test with the line inputs, the Zen Quadro was the second most authentic, where after 100 regenerations, the newly recorded signal was still nearly identical to the original. The next test looks at the frequency response of the preamps, and they're pretty much flat throughout the majority of the audible range. There's nothing really special about its performance on this test. It performed just as good as any other high-end audio interface. So let's check out the noise floor of the preamps. We're going to do an SM7B test. Now, this is kind of relevant because this is a super popular microphone. A lot of people use it, and a lot of people complain that they get too much noise when they're using this microphone. I don't understand why this is such a popular microphone. In my opinion, this is literally the worst microphone you can get for its price. I host a Facebook group. It's called Get.Pro.Recordings, and I help people on this group just getting beautiful recordings. Pretty straightforward. And please feel free to join the group. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I'll do my best to help you with mixes, mastering, room treatment, upgrading your studio, whatever it is you need help with. Just post your question there. I'll do the best I can to help you out. And I've had a few people go on there and ask me, hey, Chris, why are my recordings so noisy? And I'd ask, well, what microphone are you using? An SM7B. Oh, okay, well, that's why your recordings are noisy. Get a different microphone, problem solved. I don't know of any microphone that has as weak of an output as this. And that's the reason you get a lot of noise with this microphone. It has such a weak output that every single preamp in the world has a noise floor, no matter how good the preamp is. And because this has such a weak output, you have to crank the gain of your preamp, which brings up the noise floor. So right now, what we're hearing is the SM7B into the Zen Quadro. And it's just pure. There's no EQ or compression or anything on it. And it sounds pretty good. I don't think that noise floor, I mean, it's there a little bit. You can hear it if you try to hear it, but it's not problematic, not by any means. But in real life situation, you will have some processing on it. You'll have some EQ and compression. So let's put some of that on here and see how it sounds. Let's go to our EQs, my Paultec, my favorite here. And I'm going to boost the treble a little bit. There we go. That sounds nice. Check 1, 2, check. There we go. Some airiness on there. Check 1, 2. And I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to boost the bass too a little bit. Just get that kind of a radio voice. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Yeah. Check 1, 2. Yeah. So I've got a total smiley face EQ on here. And I'm going to put some compression on it. Let's go to my favorite 1176 here. Check 1, 2, check. Oh, that's way too much compression. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. So real life with some compression and EQ, this is about the noise floor that you would expect with this microphone. Now, you do hear it there a little bit. I wouldn't say it's bad, but this is also worst case scenario. Literally the worst microphone with EQ and compression. So we're bringing out that noise floor as much as possible, and it's still barely even audible. I also measured the dynamic range of the line inputs, and in my measurements, I got 112.2 decibels. This is the third most dynamic range of all the interfaces I tested. And then there's the volume of the headphone outputs. Now, there's enough juice on tap here to drive most headphones well above the comfort level of most people. However, if you're using really high impedance headphones, then there's still enough juice on tap for comfortable listening and probably even quite loud, but I don't think there'd be any extra that you'd be able to go above the threshold of comfortable listening. Now, in my tests, the Zen Quadro had the third loudest headphone outputs. However, the testing doesn't reveal everything, and the Zen Quadro has a little bit of a trick up its sleeve that makes it, in practical use, I would say the loudest of the headphone outputs. So if we look at my list, the interface with the very loudest headphone outputs is the Behringer UMC 204 HD. But like I said, tests don't reveal everything. When you're listening back to your recording and using the direct monitoring, you have to balance your mix using this little mix knob that goes from USB on one side to input on the other side. So let's just say you put it in the middle to hear 50% of your DAW and 50% of yourself. Well, then you're only getting half the volume of each source. So ultimately, the level of volume that you can hear is only half as loud. The Zen Quadro doesn't have this problem. It's got a built-in mixer, so you can dial in however much you want of each source. You can dial in 100% of yourself and 100% of the DAW if that's what you want. So you don't have to make any sacrifices. You have all the volume available to you. Now, there's a lot of audio interfaces that have a built-in mixer like this. For instance, the Audient ID24, which is also above the Zen Quadro on this list. But what the Zen Quadro has that the ID24 doesn't is its built-in effects. So in the rare case that you've got your volume maxed out, but you still want it to be louder, well, with the Audient ID24 or the majority of other audio interfaces, I mean, that's too bad. That's all you can get. But with the Zen Quadro, you can just slap a compressor on that channel, crank up the makeup gain, and you can get a higher level of average volume. Now, the main thing that sets the Zen Quadro apart from other audio interfaces, and especially in its price range, is the built-in DSP effects. The interface itself, right here, it has its own built-in processing chip to run effects like guitar amp emulations, EQ, compression, reverb, and there's lots of other effects. Now, there are other audio interfaces, even within the same price range, that still have built-in DSP, but honestly, they're just not at the same level. For instance, the Steinberg UR44C, which, for a variety of reasons, I think it's one of the worst interfaces available for its price. The preamps in it are really noisy. Or even the RME Babyface Pro, which is an excellent interface, but the DSP still just isn't at the same level as the Zen Quadro, and the Babyface Pro is a fair bit more expensive. This DSP is useful for a variety of reasons. You can use this interface as a 14-channel mixing console and dial in effects on the main channels as needed. And for live streaming, this is really ideal because you can dial in the effects in real time and hear it in your ears exactly as it's being broadcast without any perceivable latency. And at the same time, you can record all the multi-tracks into your DAW with effects or without effects or both on separate tracks. It comes with 37 different effects, and there's more available if you need something more specialized, such as a de-esser, a reel-to-reel tape saturation emulator, or even auto-tune. So the Zen Quadro is capable of 14 simultaneous inputs. So let's test this out. I've got 14 microphones on this drum kit, and we're going to record them all at the same time. And yes, I do normally record drums with this many microphones. But I have a future video planned to cover that topic, so if that interests you, you might want to subscribe. So to get 14 channels into the Zen Quadro, I'm using the 4 analog inputs on the interface itself, and then there's 2 digital inputs via SPDIF. I'm using an ART DPS2 preamp, which has built-in conversion and SPDIF out. So I've got the SPDIF output of the preamp connected to the SPDIF input of the Zen Quadro. And then I've got another 8-channel converter, a Focusrite 8 pre, which is going via ADAT out of the converter and 8 channels into the Zen Quadro. So after I got everything all hooked up and I hit the record button, it all went smooth. Everything went as I was expecting it to, and I think the recording turned out fantastic.
Stronger still, I wrestle with fate against my will. In the silence, thunder speaks my name. But your heart I must not claim. Caught in the crossfire of promises and dreams, torn between. Yeah, my soul reaches for the other side. Caught in the crossfire, promises and dreams, torn between hot side seas. You're my comfort, my dear lullaby. Yeah, my soul reaches for the other side.
All right, let's take a quick look at the front panel controls of the Zen Quadro. So first off, we have the big rotary button right here in the middle, and that'll control... Well, it'll actually control whatever you have it set to control. I'll get to that in a minute. You've got 3 buttons for gain, your monitors, and the Antelope button, which basically goes back a menu. And then there's the rotary dial, and you can also depress the rotary dial. And between those functions, you can control a very wide variety of settings on here. So first, let's take a look at the gain button. Now, this one's pretty straightforward. Push the gain button, and you've got control of your mic preamps 1, 2, 3, and 4. And by pushing the rotary button, you can change it from mic to line input to the high Z input. If I push and hold it, well, it has to be on microphone. When it's on microphone, if I push and hold it, that instantiates 48-volt phantom power, and I can turn it off. So that's all pretty easy to do from the front panel. And then the Antelope button to go back to the main menu. If I push and hold the gain button, this gives me some advanced controls. I can select my clock source, so internal, but I can clock the unit off of ADAT or off of SPDIF. My sample rate, I can select any sample rate I want. And it even goes down to 32 kilohertz, which is kind of neat. I haven't seen any other audio interface do that. And then there's these 3, the monitor/headphone 1, the headphone 2, and the line output. This is where you control your individual mixes if you want to control them from the front panel. So if I go into monitor/headphone 1, any one of these channels can have any input. So you can adjust the input of this track, and you've got a wide variety of options here. I've got it set to preamp channel 1. You can control the panning, pretty straightforward. And you can control the track level. And you have all of these same controls for all of the channels available. And push the Antelope button to go back. And it's the same controls for headphone 2 and for the line output. So those are your 3 independent mixes. And then you also have more advanced control of your routing. And you can control the brightness. Right now we're at 75%, 100%. And then this button here is your headphone/monitor. So you push that and there you go. You can control your monitor volume, push it again for headphone 1, and it just cycles between your monitor, your line output, and your headphone 1 and headphone 2. And whichever one you leave it on when you exit the menu, either by just leaving it and it'll exit the menu by itself, or if you want to exit the menu faster, you just hit the Antelope button to go back. Whichever one you leave it on, so we're leaving it on line output, that's what it's going to default to the rotary dial adjusting when it's on the main menu. So if I turn the rotary dial right now, it'll adjust my line output volume. And if I push it, it's going to mute it. Unpush it, it unmutes it. And then I can push and hold the headphone monitor button for some advanced controls of other things. So I've got some settings for my peak meters, my monitor trim, my line output trim, DC coupling of the input. I can turn it on and off. DC coupling of the output, turn it on and off. I can load presets. So preset 1, 2, there's up to 5 presets that I can store. And the presets are actually stored on the audio interface itself. It has some memory in here. And that'll store all of your settings of your volume, your mixer setup, all of your routing. So you can access that really quickly and easily. And you can also save your presets really quickly and easily. Just go into there. You've got your 5 options. Choose which one. I'll save this to preset 4. Boom. There we go. We're saved. And you've got some screensaver adjustments. Tell you about your device, like the serial number. And you can just do a factory reset really easily. Boom. Factory presets restored. That's how easy that is. And any changes that you make on here are also reflected in real time in the software. So if I go to my headphone monitor volume, dial this up and down, you can see that monitor volume going up and down. Change that to my headphone 1 volume. There's that going up and down. If I go into my settings menu, say I want to turn DC coupling on or off. DC coupling, let's turn that off and on so you can see that being toggled on the software. I'll turn it off again. So the unit itself is in constant communication with the software. And I can go into the software, put effects on it, or do whatever routing I want, and then save it to the internal memory of the audio interface itself to have quick access to that if I want to use the audio interface as a standalone device without even having the computer attached. All right, so let's take a look at the software monitoring controls of the Zen Quadro. So the mixer layout is pretty basic. You've got your inputs right up here. You've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the first 2, they can be microphone, line, or high Z. And then the second 2, these are the ones on the back panel here. They can be microphone or line inputs. And then you have your mixing section here where you've got channel strips for all of the possible inputs. So your 4 analog inputs on the interface itself. And then there's some software channels and ADAT channels. So 8 channels of ADAT, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I configured the last 2 for loopback so that I can record myself into the DAW right now. But any of these channel strips can actually accept any input that you want to configure them to. So let's just take a look at ADAT 1, which is just random. All of these will be the same. I could have preamp 1, 2, 3, or 4, or emulated mic, or the USB channels, ADAT in, SPDIF in. I can just mute it. And there's also an oscillator available. If we go into the settings here, there's my oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. So I can just create a test tone and use that within the mixer for whatever I might need a test tone for. It's quite handy sometimes. You've got DC coupled inputs, DC coupled outputs. So pretty much all audio interfaces are going to have a low cut filter on the analog inputs so that DC voltage can't go in and that could damage the equipment. So a low cut filter will eliminate any of that, but it also reduces the low frequencies that the interface picks up. So it's kind of a compromise. Now on the Antelope Zen, and this is something I haven't seen in any other audio interface. It might exist, but just not that I've seen. You can actually enable or disable the DC coupling, which is really cool. So if you've got some gear that's like putting out really low frequencies and you want to capture those, you just turn on the DC coupling and then you've got a direct connection that basically bypasses the low cut filter. So back to our mixing panel here, you've got your sliders to adjust the volume. And then you got your output sections. So you got 3 different output sections: monitor / headphones 1. And then you've got your headphones 2, and that's the second headphone output port, which can have its own independent mix. And then your line outputs. There's 2/4-inch outputs on the back here, and they can have their own independent mix as well. And loopback recording is available, and I'm actually using it right now. I can send the output from whatever I'm mixing here in real time. I can send that live output to whatever software I want to record it into, whether it's recording software or streaming software. Now, for streamers, this is super handy because you can create your mix in real time. What you hear on your headphones is exactly what you're streaming. So you can send your headphone 1 / monitor mix, your headphone 2 mix, or you can even send both of these mixes at the same time on their own individual channels. Now, within the mixer, you can create your own customized mix with effects. And that's one of the big features of the Zen Quadro, is that the DSP happens in real time. So DSP is digital signal processing. So you can actually instantiate effects like EQ, compression, guitar distortion, like guitar amp emulations, there's reverb. And you can instantiate these in real time with no noticeable latency and create your mix on the fly and send that to whatever your DAW, your streaming platform, or if you're performing live, you can use this as the mixer to control the feed to the front of house for the live sound. And you just adjust all your volumes here, adjust all your effects up here in the effects rack, and you can get it sounding really good. And another really great thing about having this level of control is that you can save your sessions and choose everything here that you want to save and basically save it as snapshots. So if you've got a specific setup for live streaming that you like to use, but you don't want to keep it in that configuration all the time, you just save that session and then you can come back to it anytime. So that's super handy for a lot of people, and it makes this interface very versatile. And another thing that this does that is very unique to this interface that I haven't seen on, I don't think I've seen it on any other audio interface. You can save snapshots of the settings on the interface itself. So even if you're using it in standalone, you don't even have a computer, or if your computer crashes, whatever, you can just go into the menu here and save up to 5 different settings that you'll be able to recall them even if you're using a completely different computer or not even hooked up to a computer. All right, so let's take a look at some of the effects that we have here that we can use on our voice or our guitar or our synth or our whatever you've got your microphone hooked up to. So to put effects on, just click on the box here where it says Add Effects. Pretty straightforward. I like it when they make things easy. Add effects, boom. Add new effect. Oh, they couldn't make it easier. Great. Clear Q. So this is just a very simple EQ, very basic. You've got all your frequencies up here. Gain, reduction. Yeah. So some 15K. Let's put some 15K. You can make it wide or narrow. Oh, you can change the curve. Let's add some more 15K. Boom. All right. Okay. 15K. Boom. Check 1, 2. Okay. Anyways, it's an EQ. You know how to use an EQ. I'm not going to bore you with the EQ anymore, but let's get rid of that EQ. Next effect here, just a basic compressor. Let's put our ratio up and the threshold down. There. Now you can see, well, you can see it and hear it, the compression kicking in. Okay. Again, you know what a compressor does. I don't need to go over that. Let's get rid of that compressor. There we go. I can hear myself. Okay, there's a gate. I'm not going to go over that in detail. An expander. It's kind of cool. And then some of the more specialized effects. You've got under modulation here, there's 3 different chorus type effects. I'm just grabbing this one because it's the first one, just randomly. Boom. Now I can hear 2 of myself. Level, blend, feedback. I think there's more than 2 of me in there. So anyways, a couple cool different effects here. Let's get rid of this. We've got our vintage EQs. So like this is your classic Pultec style EQ. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Let's go 12 kilohertz. There we go. We can boost and attenuate. The cool thing about a Pultec style EQ is that you can boost and attenuate the same frequency, but it does them slightly differently, so you get kind of a neat effect. A lot of engineers really like the Pultec EQs. And let's move on. Let's get rid of that. And we'll check out, okay, a bunch of vintage compressors here. Your FET A76, pretty straightforward. We all know what this is modeling. It's Universal Audio 1176, for those of you who don't know. Yep, pretty basic controls. Most of us know how to use this already. vintage mic preamps. You know what? They've got the model of the Gyrotech 9 here. That's really cool. Not that I know what the Gyrotech 9 preamp sounds like, but I want to know because Gyrotech actually offers the schematics and instructions online and to show you how to build one of these yourself. So if you want to do your own home DIY project and build yourself a Gyrotech 9, you can just go on their website and find all that information. I'm pretty tempted to build one. Okay, I'll get rid of that. We've also got guitar amps. Boom. Ow, that was loud in my ears. Okay, get rid of that. I've got a guitar here to show you the guitar amps. Let's actually use a guitar for these. So to use a guitar, it's pretty simple. I'm going to plug it into input channel 2. So let's grab our guitar cord here. There we go. Now on input 2, I'm going to select it from microphone to high Z. Boom, there we go. Let's do a quick level check. It's a little on the quiet side. Let's boost that preamp a bit. Yeah, still maybe a little quiet. There we go. That should be all right. That'll get the job done. All right, let's grab this axe and listen to these effects a little bit. All right, first things first, whenever you plug your guitar in, you got to tune that sucker. So, luckily, there's a built-in tuner right here. So let's get this guy tuned. All right, now let's take a look at these guitar amps. Effects. Guitar amp, so you got all these different amps you can choose from. And let's add a cabinet in there as well. Whatever, we'll go dark face with dark face. There we go. Oh, that is dark sounding. I'm not sure if it's face sounding, but it's dark sounding. Top 30. This is another fairly clean sounding amp. All right, let's go to Modern US. This has got a lot more crunch on it. We'll switch the cabin. We'll go to a modern cabinet as well. There we go. Another kind of neat thing too, that I think Antelope did a really good job of modeling this. For the guitar amps, I can't really say if they modeled them well or not because I don't know what these amps actually sound like, but I do know how the sound changes when you move microphones in a certain direction, and they did a really good job of modeling that. And you can control, so here's our 57. Ah, yeah, there's our 57. And they modeled a few different options of microphones here as well. Let's try another guitar amp here, the rock one. I actually like this one for rock music. I think it sounds good. Let's go to the green 4x12. Oh, that's pretty bright. There's a lot of treble on there. Let's dial it. There we go. Yeah, that's crunchy. And then a few other guitar amps that they modeled. I don't know what some of these are, but some of them I think are pretty obvious, like this one based on the color, and it's called an Orange. Burn Sphere. See, I don't know what this one is, but this has got a really wicked lead tone to it. So having guitar amp emulation is my favorite DSP effect on an interface. And in my opinion, it's the most important one. So if you have an interface that has DSP processing and guitar amp emulation, what you can do is record the raw guitar signal that sounds like this. Here's the raw guitar, no processing on it at all. But the guitar player who's playing, he's not going to hear the raw guitar. You can put these amp emulations on there so he can actually hear what he would sound like going through an amp. Boom, that's what he hears. And that's important for the guitar player. He can't just pretend that that's got distortion on it, because the sound that he hears affects, like, it affects the angle of his pick, it affects how aggressively he's hitting the strings, it affects his performance in a big way. So this gives us the option to record both the raw signal and the amplified signal. Actually, right now I wasn't recording the raw signal, I was just recording whatever's coming out of this channel strip here. But if I want to record the raw signal, I could use any of these additional channel strips here. I'm going to use channel 4, which is set to preamp 4 right now, but I can set that to preamp 2. And so now the signal from the guitar, the exact same signal, is going into both of these channel strips, but this one's got effects on it, and this one doesn't. And that's going to be recorded into channel 4 of my DAW without the effects. So there is one particular thing that this audio interface does that is hands down better than any other audio interface or software emulation that I have ever heard. And maybe this is just because I'm such a geek, but the one thing that this does that I just love so much is its built-in reverb. Now you might be thinking, oh, Chris, it's just reverb. What's the big deal about that? And well, normally it wouldn't be a big deal. Like, a lot of other audio interfaces have DSP with reverb on them, and it's nothing special. But this one is special because it's the nicest, most natural sounding digital reverb that I've ever heard. And I specify digital because I've actually heard acoustic reverbs that sound really beautiful. I have a history of working construction, and I've been in some really large steel tanks. And I've always been into audio, so as an audio nerd, inside these steel tanks when there's nobody around, I would just play with the reverb because these had really natural, long decay reverbs. I remember testing it once. I made like some weird sound, like I clapped my hands or bloop or something. And I timed the reverb and it lasted 13 seconds until I couldn't hear it anymore. And having this opportunity to be able to hear a real life natural reverb and what it sounds like created a bit of maybe an arrogance or a fussiness for me, in that every time I heard a digital reverb, none of them could emulate what I heard in real life. So I became a little bit of a reverb snob. I spent a lot of money on all these different plugins. I've tried out so many different reverbs, and a lot of them are quite good. And I ended up settling with some UAD reverbs that I really liked. But when I got the Zen Quadro and I plugged it in and I tried out the reverb, I was just blown away. Like, for the first time in forever, I was just like, wow, that actually sounds real, the way these reverbs really do sound in a large steel tank, with a nice, natural, and authentic sounding decay that can go on for a long period of time. And yeah, I literally just sat there with my headphones on, making silly, childish noises into the microphone for probably like half an hour the first time that I played with the reverb in this. I know most of you aren't going to geek out on the reverb quite like I did, but let's just give it a listen. All right, so in the software, the way they implemented the reverb is actually a little different than the other effects. See, normally to put an effect on, you would just add your effects, but they don't have reverb here. At first, I was kind of annoyed about this because, well, why wouldn't they put the reverb in there just like any other effect? And then it dawned on me that, whenever I'm mixing in Logic and adding a reverb to anything, I always put it on an auxiliary bus as a send and return. I never use it on the channel strip itself. So it totally makes sense. So I actually really appreciate that they did implement it this way as a send return. You just click on the AuraVerb right here, boom, and that opens up a little mini mixer with all your sends, and you've got panning controls as well. And then down here, you've got a master on, off, and a few different controls for some different reverb settings to adjust the tone and stuff like that. So to dial in the reverb, we just put it on the send. Check, 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 check. Whoa, there it is. Now, one of the downsides of the reverb being implemented as a send in this way is that it's not a plugin that can be instantiated within the channel strips. And the reason that's a downside is because all of these other plugins can be purchased to use in your DAW as a regular plugin. They're not confined to be used only with the Zen Quadro. But this AuraVerb, since it's not a plugin, it's not available to be used in the DAW. So the only way to actually use the reverb within the DAW would be to use the loopback feature of the Zen Quadro and create a send return within the DAW to route it out of the DAW through the Zen Quadro and record it back in. Even if you don't need this as an audio interface, you're just looking for a killer reverb in your studio, but you can't afford a Bricasti, this is like a poor man's Bricasti. And the last thing I want to talk about is how they did the word clock distribution on this, because I think it's really cool. Now, I don't want to say too much about it because, honestly, I don't really know how they did it. You see, normally when an audio interface has an ADAT input for connecting an external converter, you need to send the word clock information from that audio interface to the external converter so that they're synchronized. Now, there's a lot of audio interfaces that have the ADAT input, but they don't have any way of synchronizing the word clock. And this really annoys me when they do that. And there's two reasons why I don't like that. The first reason is that you have to set the external converter as the master clock, and then the interface has to follow it. And sometimes, I would even say usually, this would be a downgrade in the quality of the clocking. And the second reason is it's really inconvenient because if your interface's clock is following an external device, then when you change the sample rate in your DAW, so on your computer, if you just go to a different session that has a different sample rate, well, your interface isn't going to follow the sample rate that you changed on your computer because it's stuck to following the sample rate of the external converter. So if you open up a new project that has a different sample rate, then you got to manually change the sample rate on your external converter. Examples of audio interfaces that have this problem are the Audient ID14, Universal Audio Apollo Twin, Focusrite Claret Plus 2 Pre, SSL 12, and honestly, there's just too many to list. Now, from looking at the Zen Quadro, I was honestly expecting it to have the same problem, and I was anticipating that would be something I would complain about in this review video. Now, technically, the Zen Quadro does actually have a word clock output because it's got SPDIF out, and you can send word clock information out over that. However, the vast majority of external converters that have an ADAT output don't have a SPDIF input. So that SPDIF output is not very practical in most cases for sending out word clock information. But then I started using this audio interface and I wanted to test everything out. And once I got the external converter hooked up to it, I noticed that Antelope did something really innovative to come up with a different approach to solve those two problems that I mentioned. You see, you can connect an external converter over ADAT and synchronize the audio interface to both the computer and the external ADAT converter at the same time. The audio interface locks onto the external converter, but it doesn't follow its sample rate. It follows the sample rate from the DAW. And if you're thinking, well, Chris, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it actually doesn't make any sense to me either. And like I said, I don't know how they did this. But what I do know is that I experimented with this quite a bit, and I got consistent results that it works really well. The interface locks onto the DAW and follows its sample rate while simultaneously locking onto an external converter and having perfect sound quality with no pops and clicks like you would normally get if the word clock wasn't properly synced up. So whatever Antelope did here, I think it's really awesome and I'm giving them 2 thumbs up. Now, everybody and their individual situation is different, but I think if I can generalize for most people, I would recommend it over the Apollo Twin or the Neumann MT48 because it has similar capabilities, similar sound quality, and a much lower price point. Even without the DSP, it's still an excellent audio interface, but the DSP really is what makes this interface stand out. If you're looking for a high-end audio interface with built-in DSP, I think it's a no-brainer. The Antelope Zen Quadro is hands down better than anything else in its price range. So I hope to see you on my Facebook group, and if you want to see more videos about getting beautiful recordings, you might want to subscribe to this channel.